You're probably thinking of hiring a podcast booking agency, but in this video, I'm going to show you the 5 things that you absolutely need to have in place before hiring one so that you don't waste your time, your energy, and your money. Now, here's the thing. I actually run a podcast booking agency, podcastguest.io, where we've worked with over 300 business owners and have gotten them booked on some of the top podcasts in their industry and helped them monetize those appearances at a very high level. So you would probably think that I would be the guy that would sit up here and tell you,
hire a podcast booking agency. It's going to be a great idea.
But that's 100% not the case, because hiring a podcast booking agency is not for everybody. Now, here's the thing. Most podcast booking agencies, they'll go ahead and they'll take your money. They'll sign you up. They'll typically charge you anywhere from, I've seen 10K, I've seen all the way up to 30K plus to work with you as a client. And what they'll tell you is, we're going to get you all of this exposure. We're going to get you in front of, and by the way, you're going to be really impressed with all of my drawings. We're going to get you in front of all of your ideal clients and do all of these things. But what they don't tell you is that there are 5 things that need to be in place in order for you to be able to capitalize on and actually profit from your podcast appearances. And the thing is the problem with most companies is that they will just take your money rather than actually ensure that you have the things in place before you appear as a guest on podcast. Because here's the thing, unless you have certain things in place, you are going to waste your time, your energy, your effort, and ultimately your money. So with that being said, let's just dive right into what are the 5 things that you need in order to hire a podcast booking agency and actually have it turn out as something that helps you grow your business. The first one is that you need to be clear. And when I say you need to be clear, how I like to define this is you need to be clear on your offer. You need to know exactly what you sell and who you sell it to. And the way that I like to describe this to people is, if you can't describe what it is that you do and who you serve in one sentence, you're probably not there yet. And the reason why this is so utterly important is because when you're going and appearing as a guest on podcast, you need to, number one, be able to articulate your message so that the person that you do serve can resonate with that message. So you need to be crystal clear on your offer. In other words, you must first know exactly what you do and who you serve. Because it goes back to the old adage of a good old Dan Kennedy quote, which says that a message for everybody is a message that speaks to nobody. So if you're going to go on a podcast and you're not crystal clear exactly what you do and who you do it for, it's just going to fall on deaf ears and you are not going to be able to convert that audience. And more specifically, I always say that there's the 3 S's that you need to have in place. The first thing is that you must be speaking to a specific person. So you don't want to go on a podcast and say, hey, I help everybody do everything. No, you want to say you help this type of person with this thing specifically. So if you don't have a specific person that you've identified, then being a guest on podcast is going to be a waste of your time. Now, if you're somebody, as an example, where you help business owners save money on taxes and outsmart the IRS, then that's clearly articulating the type of person that you're looking to work with and the type of person that you help get results. The second S is that these people tend to have a specific problem that you help them solve. So as an example of what I just said, if a business owner is making a lot of money, well, one of the biggest problems is going to be they're going to have a really big tax burden that they are going to have to deal with. So with that being said, you're helping them solve a specific problem. Now, sure, you could be somebody that makes some money if you have a very general problem that you help people overcome, like,
oh, I help people with their life or their mindset.
Cool, but it's a lot harder to be successful with that as it is to be successful with something like, hey, I help business owners solve their tax problem. Why? Because that's a much more specific problem and specialists get paid the highest. So think about it like the analogy of a physician versus a brain surgeon. Why is a brain surgeon compensated so much more? Because they're helping people solve a very specific problem, okay? And then the last S is that you need to make sure that you have a specific solution for those individuals. So the clients that I've worked with that help people reduce their tax burden, outsmart the IRS, why is that such a great offer typically? Well, because they have specific solutions that they have in place to help the specific person overcome that specific problem. So hopefully you see why having a clear offer that speaks to a specific person with a specific problem and you having a specific solution is going to be the thing that is going to resonate with podcast audiences. So if you're somebody that hasn't clearly identified the specific person that you are looking to serve or do serve, and you haven't identified the specific problem that you help them solve, and you haven't identified your specific solution or method or framework, then being a guest on podcast is going to do absolutely nothing for you. And you're just going to be shouting your message out into the world. Cool. But if you want to use this as a vehicle to help you grow your business, it's not going to be something that's going to do it for you because you don't have the clear foundational offer in place. So you're just going to speak to the world, but see no conversion. Okay. So the second thing that you need to make sure that you have in place before working with a podcast booking agency is that you must have a way right now of predictably getting leads. In other words, you must first have an established lead source right now before working with a podcast booking agency. Because, and here's the thing, they don't want me to tell you this because this is probably going to cost other companies a lot of money. Well, the good news for me is that I don't need your money. So I don't really care if you ever work with me. I make these videos because I actually want to make sure that you make the right decision in terms of hiring a podcast booking agency, whether you should, whether you shouldn't, what to look for, etc. And what they'll try to tell you is
podcasts are going to get you all of these leads. They're going to do all of these great things for you.
Sure, that's true, but only if you have the capability of having a long-term mindset. Why? Because podcasts typically aren't going to produce a result for 90 plus days. Why? Because first you're going to have to schedule the show, then you're going to have to appear on the show, then they're going to have to edit the show, then they're going to put it in the queue, and then they're going to release the show. And this right here is typically a long process of a 60 to 90 day long process. So therefore, if you expect that being a guest on podcast is just going to get you leads overnight, you are 100% mistaken with that. Now, the good part of being a guest on podcast is it's going to help you build your brand, where now people start to come to you and they look at you as the person that everybody comes to because you appeared as a guest on all of those podcasts. But if you can't afford financially to delay the results of going on podcasts that are typically going to come at least 90 days out, then being a guest on podcast does not make sense. So that's why we turn away a lot of the people that want to work with us, because unless you already have a way of getting leads right now, maybe you do organic cold DMs, maybe you run ads, maybe you have really great referral network that you tap into that produces a lot of leads for you. But unless you have a predictable, I'm going to call it PNC, unless you have a predictable and consistent way of getting leads right now, being a guest on podcast typically isn't the right thing for you to do, because then you're going to come into the agreement
thinking, oh, I'm going to get a bunch of leads and it's going to be the thing that's going to help turn around the business, etc.
What I always tell people is that podcasts are simply going to amplify whatever you currently have in place right now. So don't come into this thinking that hiring a podcast booking agency, no matter what they tell you or how hard they try to sell you on it, it is not going to be the thing that is going to magically turn around your business, because it is a long-term game. So you need to make sure that you are in the financial position where you could be able to afford prolonging the results of this for 90 plus days. You must sign up with a podcast booking agency with the understanding and the mindset that I am totally cool delaying these results for 90 plus days. Now, of course, like I said, there's a ton of benefits that come with being a guest on podcasts that I go to in plenty of other videos. But my job here is to educate you in terms of if you should do this. So if you're not in the position where you're generating leads predictably and consistently, and you can afford to prolong results and delay gratification, for a lack of better words, for 90 plus days, you shouldn't hire a podcast booking agency. Third thing that you need to make sure that you have in place is that you have a proven and validated sales process. Now, for some people, this looks like a sales call. For some people, this looks like a webinar. For some people, this looks like a challenge. There's a variety of different sales conversion mechanisms out there. But what you need to make sure of is that you have a proven and validated sales process in place. Why? Because if you go on a podcast and you get tons of leads from that podcast, and then they come to you, but you're not able to close them or convert them into a client, then what good is being a guest on podcast? So with that being said, what you want to make sure of is if you're doing sales calls, as an example, and you see how this is building upon the last few things that we've talked about, you want to make sure that you have a clear and defined process in place that's designed to take that person that comes from the podcast and gets them to convert. Because if you just think podcasts are magically going to make money appear in your account, that is 100% not the case. So you must make sure that you have a proven and a validated sales process in place before going on podcast, or else you're going to waste your money. Think about it. If you're going to run ads, or if you're going to do cold email, and you do not have a proven and validated sales process in place where you have consistently enrolled people over time, it's going to be a waste of your money. It's going to be the same exact thing. And if you don't have this third piece in place, absolutely do not hire a podcast booking agency. So the fourth thing that you have to have in place is actually a commitment and a mindset. And what that is specifically is number 4, you must be willing to show up consistently. Because sometimes people come into this with the understanding that,
oh, I'm just going to go on 1 or 2 or 3 podcasts and it's going to change my business and I'm going to get all of these leads and I'm going to do all of these things.
But there's a couple of things that you first need to understand. When it comes to being a guest on podcast, I like to call it the pyramid of podcast, where there tends to be different levels of being a guest on podcast. Now, when you think of the biggest podcast in the world, let's think of like a podcast like The Diary of a CEO. That's going to be all the way up here on the 5th layer of podcast. And the big thing that a lot of companies will try to sell you on
is, hey, we're going to get you on the biggest podcast in the world.
But what they don't tell you is that being a guest on The Diary of a CEO is something that's probably not realistic for you. Now, on the other end of the equation, there's going to be podcasts down here are going to be podcasts where it's like some dude that just started last week in his mom's garage and he has like 1 episode. Now, truthfully, if a podcast booking agency, I've seen so many times and it really gets me frustrated, they'll tell you you're going to get on really big podcasts, but then they'll get you on layer 1 podcast. That's just terrible and a waste of your money. Where you're typically going to start off is somewhere in this range, where you're going to be in the 2 to 3 range, where the podcast booking agency typically has some connections with podcasts, etc. But what you want to make sure of is that you need to give yourself ample time to be able to scale the different layers of being a guest on podcast. So let's say you start off on layer 2 and you're going on shows that maybe have 40, 50 episodes. They're pretty decent in terms of size. They have traction, etc. If you want to continue to scale to 2, 3, and 4, a podcast booking agency isn't going to be able to do that for you magically overnight, no matter how much they want to sell you on that pipe dream. Now, the cool thing is with what we do over here at podcastguest.io, we've worked with quite literally some of the biggest names in the world. So therefore, we do have direct access to podcasts that are at this level. However, it's unreasonable to think that if you've never been a guest on podcast before, that you're just going to jump up to 4 and 5. And don't let anybody sell you on that idea. And the other thing is, you genuinely do not want to start at level 4 and 5. Why? Because you do not have the fundamentals in place to be able to be successful at level 4 and 5. So where you actually want to start, if you look at anybody, there was a really good video that I saw by Daniel Priestley, and he actually talked about this concept of the podcast pyramid, and he said where I first started was down in these 2 levels. Because when you're down in these 2 levels, you know what works, what doesn't work, and you refine your craft and your skills. Why would you want to start up here if you haven't mastered the art of being a guest on podcast? Now, luckily, here at podcastguest.io, that's one of the biggest things that we work with our clients. But specifically, if you don't have that in place and you just think, oh, I'm going to go on the biggest podcast, that would be the biggest mistake that you could potentially make, because it's like spending $10,000 a month on ads. Well, if you haven't already validated that process, and if you don't have a really great sales team on the back end, it's going to be money down the drain and an opportunity wasted. So with that being said, you showing up consistently, number 1, is going to help you develop the skills. But also number 2, what's going to happen is as you start off on these layers, then these podcast hosts are going to start to notice you down on these layers. So in other words, as you develop the skills, what's going to happen is that these people at these levels are going to begin to notice you if you're down at this level, if you do it consistently, because they're going to start seeing you show up everywhere. And if you put in the work to develop the skills, which is a really big part of the puzzle here, then these people are going to want you to come on their podcast. So with that being said, if you just think you're going to go on 1 or 2 or 3 podcasts, that's absolute garbage. And people are going to sell you on that because they just want your money. You have to be defiantly committed to consistently going on podcasts to work your way up to these shows. Now, yes, like I said, hiring a podcast booking agency will typically help you avoid the garbage. Yes, that is true. But don't go into it with the expectation that you're just going to get on all of these big name, large podcasts as your first 1, 2, or 3 shows, because that's just not realistic. Think about it from a podcast host perspective. Why would they want to have you on their show if they are Diary of a CEO or a show of that caliber? So be totally okay with doing these shows that are a level 2 or a level 3. Now, here's the thing I'll mention on this. Sometimes level 2 or 3 are actually better than doing level 4 and 5. Why? Because level 2 and 3 shows tend to be very niche specific podcasts. And my clients typically actually see more ROI from niche specific podcasts than these shows, which tend to be more like celebrity level shows. Okay. So with that being said, consistency, commit to doing this. The minimum amount of podcasts that will work with a client is 12 podcasts. We typically do not work with anybody that is not willing to at least commit to 12 podcasts, because we know that that's what's required to get you results. All right. And then the last part of the equation is only hire a podcast booking agency if they have this one thing in place, and more importantly, if you're open to it. And that last thing, number 5, is coaching. Because what we've identified is that even if you get onto a really great podcast podcast. And we've worked with so many clients that have gotten onto podcasts in the past, and they ultimately did not have those podcasts turn into conversions. Because here's the reality, getting on podcast is not enough. It's not about just having conversations. What you want to make sure is that those conversations turn into conversions. So if the podcast booking agency does not have one-on-one custom tailored coaching specific to you to help you exactly, or to show you exactly how to turn those conversations, I definitely misspelled that there, into conversions, then do not do it. But more importantly, if you're not open to that, if you're somebody and you think that you're the best speaker in the world and you have it all down pat, then don't do it. Definitely don't hire us, because one of the reasons why a lot of people hire us here at podcastguest.io is because we've worked with hundreds of literally the highest level business owners. You're talking Les Browns, Brian Tracy's, people that have historically been quite literally the greatest speakers on planet Earth. And they come to us and allow us to coach them. Why? Because being a guest on podcast is a fundamentally different conversion vehicle than speaking on a stage, ads, etc. So with that being said, if you're not open to coaching, well, I'm definitely not going to take you on as a client. But also number two, I would strongly advise you not hire a podcast booking agency if you're not open to the concept of them coaching you. However, what you need to make sure of is what type of coaching are they going to provide. A lot of the clients we work with, they come to us and say, yeah, a lot of the other companies told us that they were going to coach us. And then they put them with some account manager that literally has no experience with sales, marketing, speaking, conversion, nothing. And they actually waste their money. So they just hire some random person that they call a coach that has no experience coaching in that specific regard. So definitely watch out for that. But with that being said, the coaching aspect is huge, because you being a guest on podcast is a fundamentally different marketing vehicle than anything else that exists. So you want to make sure that you maximize that vehicle, but that's only possible if you're open to the concept of coaching. So if you just want to come in and get booked on podcast, I'm telling you right now, you're not going to be maximized for that specific conversion vehicle, and you're just going to waste a lot of your time, energy, effort, and money. So those are the big five. Those are the big five things that you need to make sure that you have in place, you have the mindset of, that you're open to when considering hiring a podcast booking agency. So just to recap, you must first need a clear offer. You need to know exactly who it is that you're talking to, exactly what it is that you have for them, what problem that you help them solve. Number two, you must clearly identify and know that you have P and C. You have a predictable and consistent way for generating leads right now, because podcasts are inherently going to be a long-term game. Third thing is that you need to make sure that you have a proven and validated sales process, because we can get you all the traffic in the world, but if you can't convert those people into clients, what good is it? You must make sure that you are willing to go on these podcasts consistently, because it is going to be something where you're going to have to make progression. It's not going to happen overnight. And then last piece of the puzzle, like we just described, is that you must be open and willing to experience a very high level of coaching, where the people that you work with at least make sure that they provide this, because it is a fundamentally different vehicle of conversion than everything else. So make sure that you're taking these big five into consideration when making your decision whether or not to work with a podcast booking agency. And I promise you that these five things are going to save you a lot of time, energy, effort, and money. You could just thank me later.